Today we are covering tips and tricks for the upcoming hardcore servers on Classic era. I have done a video like this before, just about a week ago, so I guess you can consider this one part 2. The aim of this video is for there to be some tips and tricks for everyone, so they will be a little bit all over the place, but I promise you that by the end of the video, you will have increased your chances of getting to level 60 without dying quite significantly. Now let's get into it. First of all, use fence kiting. This is especially useful if you're a ranged class, as you can effectively damage the enemy without ever taking damage yourself, but even as a melee character, this can be incredibly effective, as you can put full bleed effects, then fence kite while bleeds deal damage, or you can utilize your thrown or ranged weapons. As a warlock, this is especially beneficial when fighting against the Harvest Watchers of Westfall, which are a utter pain for warlocks, as they are immune to both fear and taunt, and many other abilities, and overall fences are just incredibly useful to help you solo mobs. You also have this one Vagash kiting strategy that I found from Rask that fall under the category of fence kiting, where you utilize the fence at a camp right under Vagash to kite him around, allowing you to solo Vagash at a pretty much any level actually. On the official hardcore servers, this might not mean as much, as you can group up, which I think a lot of people will do for elite quests, but there will still be some people playing with the solo self-found ruleset, plus there might be a solo self-found mode actually coming later down the line, so knowing how to effectively solo Vagash as soon as possible could be incredibly beneficial. You could even utilize this at launch to go right for Vagash as soon as possible, rather than waiting to be level 10 or 12 before doing it. You can also use the same strategy to solo Hogger in Elwyn Forest, by bringing him to the bridge and kite around that bridge. There could also be possibilities to do this with other elite quests in the open world, literally just look for a fence to then kite around. Now, since we just talked about fence kiting, which is great when fighting mobs that will attack you in melee range, let's also cover how to handle casters. Use line of sight. Most objects in the open world count as a line of sight, and specifically, buildings will always be line of sight. Many casters will be around some sort of object, so use that object to your advantage in order to take down those casters. Next up, consider grinding mobs instead of doing quests. On launch, starting areas are going to be absolutely packed full with people, which means that quest mobs and quest objectives are going to be harder than ever to complete due to the massively increased competition. Having played on the PTR at launch and also having played on a dead server, the impact that this competition has for your leveling speed is actually very significant. On a completely dead server, having all the quest mobs and objectives to myself, I can easily hit level 10 in about 1 hour and 45 minutes on most of the classes that I have experience playing. During the hardcore PTR at launch, this took me close to 3 hours, about a 1 hour increase to go from level 1 to level 10. Therefore, you might need to alter your leveling strategy a little bit, skip some quests and find a location not relevant to questing, and just grind mobs. Basically, do what everyone else is not doing. For example, if you're leveling as a gnome or a dwarf, there is a very powerful speed leveling location for grinding mobs, where you have NPCs that will help you kill mobs, and they also respawn 24/7, which if you have the efficiency and the uptime required to kill these mobs quickly, it can be way better than questing. Especially if the questing locations are overpopulated, which there is a high chance of them being at launch. The next tips and tricks, or well, I guess a tip, is have consumables ready in your bag. Always keep health potions in your bag, and depending on your class, consider bringing some utility potions as well. Like, for example, a limited invulnerability potion, invisibility potions, or a swiftness potion. This tip will be less important the faster you intend on hitting level 60, and more important if you plan on taking your time. Because if you're going to be hitting level 60 in the first week, there likely will not be a lot of potions available on the auction house, but the later into the service lifespan we actually get, the more consumables you will find. As a warlock, I intend to keep both health potions, mana potions, swiftness potions, invisibility potions, and limited invulnerability potions on hand, at least 1 stack of each. It is much better to have and not need than to need and not have, so just be prepared. Speaking of consumables, this is the perfect time to talk about professions. Make sure you use your professions to your advantage. For most professions, this might not be as relevant on official hardcore servers, where you can trade since most consumables, for example, are tradable, and there are no requirements to use them. But there is one big exception: engineering. If you struggle with leveling in hardcore or think you will have problems getting to level 16, consider picking up engineering. It might take some time and effort to skill up, but boy is it worth it. Engineering is unique in the way that many of the things you make actually also requires engineering in order to use. While, for example, with alchemy, you don't need alchemy to use health potions, mana potions, or any other of the potions and elixirs. Through alchemy, or through engineering, I mean you can make target dummies and bombs that can deal damage and stun enemies. It is a really useful profession for survival, and will definitely help you get to level 16 on these hardcore servers. Using those target dummies, you could even become a hero by saving your dungeon group from a wipe in the future as well, so definitely do consider picking up engineering. It is incredibly useful. Now, this one is not really a tip or trick that will help you out in terms of efficiency, but it's a huge quality of life increase that I will personally be using, and I wanted to share with you. The return of the LFG Bulletin Board add-on. If you played in the last few phases of Classic WoW in 2020, or you played TBC Classic, you might be familiar with this add-on. It has been replaced in our current version of Wrath Classic by the Group Finder system, but for Classic era, we have no such system, leaving us to look for groups in the in-game chat. Now, at the launch of a new server, this chat can be incredibly popular, and looking at it 24/7 to find groups can be exhausting, so this add-on is incredibly nice to have, as it will pull groups from the in-game chat and categorize them into a nice and easy to navigate group finding system. A huge quality of life increase, specifically for finding dungeon groups. Speaking of dungeons, I would recommend doing dungeons as often as you can while leveling. On the hardcore servers, dungeons have a 24-hour lookout, meaning they reset in the morning like heroic dungeons do, meaning you can do one of each dungeon per day. Now, for the most part, I would recommend trying to grind out as many of those dungeons as possible when possible, for two main reasons. Number one being that it can reward you with great gear. Some of the best gear you obtain while leveling will come from dungeons as loot from bosses, so the more dungeons you do, the better gear you get, and the better gear will also help you out in the open world. Number two is that at a certain point, you will find yourself lacking quests and you will be grinding mobs. Even leveling guides usually tell you to grind through 3 to 4 levels, around level 43, because you're usually lacking quests. Now, by doing dungeons, you can make up for that lack of quest experience and get the experience needed by doing those dungeons, effectively replacing a boring mob grinding session with a couple of dungeons that can give you experience and loot at the same time. So if you're in the high level 40s, for example, this could mean doing both Uldaman, Sulfarak and Moradin today, and also do all those dungeons again tomorrow, effectively giving yourself both experience and loot, just as an example. Doing dungeons is also just a nice way to take a break from questing in order to avoid burning out from questing. At least that's how I look at it. So instead of taking a break from the game because I'm bored of questing, I just do a dungeon or two and then get back to doing my quests. Lastly, a couple of quick fire notes. Number one, play it safe. I've seen a bunch of people die to greed from pulling when you're too low on health because you want to tag before another person, or just trying to go fast. So really, slow and steady wins the race. Next up, beware of dynamic respawns. Now at launch, mobs might spawn faster, due to dynamic respawns, meaning the more people are in an area, the faster mobs spawn in that area. This can be particularly dangerous in caves where both mobs and players are stacked in one small area, causing mobs to spawn very fast, which can be a death trap on hardcore where caves are already dangerous on their own. Now, this one is a little bit more speculative, but worth mentioning quickly. If layering is active on these servers, which I'm suspecting there's a high likelihood it will be aware when joining a new group that you might be transferred to another layer. For example, I have seen people join a dungeon group while running on the road in Duskwood, and then they got layered straight into Stitches and died, so be aware of where you are in the world when accepting and joining a group. As a quick disclaimer towards the end of the video, if you're interested in gold making on the upcoming official hardcore servers, like I am, then consider checking out my classic WoW gold making guide, specifically tailored towards the hardcore servers, covering the best gold farms and how to flip items and invest in gold. Like for example, how I turned 1000 gold into 20,000 gold in Season of Mastery, and reusing that same strategy on hardcore servers to make even more profit. Now that's pretty much it. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more WoW content. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.